Since many of my students have recently made pumpkins, whether it was wheel thrown or pinch pot, I wanted to show them a few ideas on how they could finish them. I'm going to show using iron oxide, cone six glazes, and also a combination of the two. So these will all be fired to cone six. The first step that I want to show is how to apply iron oxide if you're going to choose to do that. Now, iron oxide is messy, so I have designated stained old sponges for that. Notice that they are not the good sponges back there. If you see one of the towels, please move the towel so the towel does not get iron oxide on it and get it stained. If you end up by using some of the Cone 6 stoneware glazes, remember that they are in the area that says stoneware glazes. Don't use the low fire ones. And you can tell what the glazes will look like because there is always a sample that's hanging underneath the glaze and it says the name of the glaze right on it, so you can see what it's going to look like. Now, to begin with the iron oxide, I'm going to get a soft, fluffy brush from the glaze brush container, rinse it out, and that helps to condition it. And then I'm going to just mix up that iron oxide because it is very watery and it settles. Now, you just apply one layer. It doesn't take very much. You're going to apply it in that texture and in the crevices. You don't have to apply it over the entire thing. It doesn't hurt, but you don't have to. And then you're going to take one of those old stained sponges and rinse it. Now, when you rinse it, squeeze out all that water, and then you're going to wipe. As the sponge becomes clogged and more full of iron oxide, just keep rinsing it out and squeezing it out really well. And you want to keep wiping the whole thing until you get rid of the smears. If you get it on your hands, you can always wash it off with soap at the end. Now this little pumpkin, the same thing. Again, just keep rinsing out your sponge. Rotate your sponge and turn it to have a clean spot, and that will help it go a little bit easier for you as well. You can leave as much of the oxide in the texture as you want because it's only going to help enhance your form and your contrast. When you're done, you're going to wash out that brush, perhaps use a little bit of soap, wipe down any oxide that you got on the counter in the back, put the lid back on, and rinse out your sponge, and you can put that brush back in the brush container. Now you have to decide, once you've done oxide, you're going to decide, do you want to just go ahead and glaze fire it so it stays just with oxide, or do you want to put a glaze over a fired oxide? So I have some little sheets of paper in that little jar back there. You are going to write down either bisque fire or fire to cone 6. And the difference is going to be, again, if you want to put glaze on top of it, you are going to bisque fire it because you can't put the glaze on until it's been bisque fired or it's going to smear all over the place. If you want to just keep it brown with black, we would cone 6 fire it. So the bisque fire is like this. It's going to look pink when it comes out, and I will end up by putting the orange glaze on top of that little pumpkin, the little pink one. I'm going to put orange glaze on. That's been bisque fired. Now this one is going to be cone 6 fired, so it's going to turn out tan like that, and that one's done. So it is now permanent. You can see the contrasting color between bisque fire is pink and the final glaze fire is tan. Once you decide, write it on the sheet and then put the little slip of paper with your pumpkin into the cabinet, and I will put it in the appropriate kiln. Now the next one is if you want to put glaze over a bisque fired oxide. Okay, now if you choose to oxide it, you won't be able to put glaze on it until a few days later after I get it fired. So in the case of this, I'm going to now mix up the glaze because again it settles, and please again make sure that that brush is super clean. If you had oxide on it, you've got to wash it out with soap. You don't want to get oxide in the glaze, it will ruin it. So after you've mixed up your glaze, go ahead and apply it and just brush it on. Try to brush it on in even coats. You want to let it dry between layers. So as you do it and you finish one coat, give it a minute if need be, and then put your second coat, and then perhaps a third coat. Now, a tiny little pumpkin like this one, Because it has heavy texture, it will probably hold more. So I can get away with 2 coats on one with heavy texture. And on this larger one, I'll just, again, do 3 coats, letting it dry thoroughly between coats. It doesn't take very long. So again, I'm looking for a total of 3 coats. Would be normal. If it's the small one with heavy texture, I can get away with just 2 coats. And lastly, I do need to wipe the bottoms because if I have glaze on the bottom, it's going to stick to the kiln shelf. So I can sponge that off and that will reveal the clay. But there's another trick that I can show you of how to really make sure it's wiped well. And that is using a pencil. And we've done this previously, but if you lay a pencil flat on the table, and then you take your piece and you rotate it up against the pencil, it's going to draw a line 1/8 of an inch up from the table surface. So that shows you how far up you should be wiping the glaze. You shouldn't have glaze within 1/8 of an inch of the table. So you can see my pencil line and I'm just wiping it off. Now if you do use the orange Coyote glaze, it's rather close in color to our clay body, so you just have to really pay attention, make sure that you're not leaving glaze there. If you do glaze the bottom when it gets fired in the kiln, it's going to stick to whatever it's touching. So when we make little patties in a bit, I'm going to show you how to do that. You don't want to fuse it to your patty, so that's why you have to make sure it is clean on the bottom. Now I'm just wiping off a little bit of the accidental orange that I got on the stem there because I wanted to do a different color on the stem. So that is putting cone 6 glaze over bisque fired oxide. Now we're just going to put cone 6 glaze over a bisque fired piece, no oxide on this. So if you want to do this, the difference is you just get the straight glaze. You don't get any of that kind of texture or contrast that you get with the oxide. When you're done with the glaze, I would ask that you just wipe off the jar before you put the lid on so it doesn't get stuck on there when it dries. And here I'm just using a little contrast for the stem. I'm doing a green on the stem, and I just am only doing 2 coats on that because I don't want it to run down all over the pumpkin. And once again, I want to make sure that there's no glaze within 1/8 of an inch of the where it can sit on the table. Next, we're going to be making a thin patty to put underneath your glaze pieces if you're using glaze. So we're using some of the stoneware clay and I'm just flattening it out so it's pretty thin. And then I'm going to stretch it even more because I want to make it very thin like a tortilla. Now, this patty is going to be a waste piece of clay, which is about 3/4 of an inch bigger than the bottom of the pumpkin, and the pumpkin will sit on it. So if any glaze should accidentally run, it will stick to the patty and not to the kiln shelf. So again, very thin like a tortilla, and we'll just kind of trim it. So again, it's about 3/4 of an inch bigger than the bottom of the pumpkin. And you can just squeeze it and squish it. You don't have to toss it if you don't want to. So that one's great. Now, you're going to make sure that your hands aren't terribly dirty when you pick up your pieces. If they are, wash them off first. But now I'm going to pick up my pieces and I'm going to put them over here in cabinet 1314. Lay the patty flat, put your pumpkin on top, and your extra patty clay will just go back into the pug mill just like we do with our scrap at the end of the class. And there we go. Those are the 3 different methods that I showed. Iron oxide on the right, glaze second from the right with no iron oxide, and then the 2 on the left are iron oxide that was bisque fired and then covered with a cone 6 glaze and fired to the glaze firing.